Hi everyone, this is Counseling 2250, Corey's Chapter 7, Relationships. As we know, there are many types of relationships. There are friendships, marital relationships, and of course, intimacy between parents and children. You can probably think of a bunch more, but those are the typical ones. There's also different types of intimacy because sometimes we think intimacy means sex, but it really doesn't. It means, closeness or connectedness. So there could be emotional intimacy, intellectual, physical, spiritual, and or a combination of all of the above. And of course, there's also different types of relationships when it comes to all those things. There's exclusive, such things as polyamory, which means having more than one partner. And that could be exclusive, as in, like, let's say a closed four people or whatever it is, but it also could be non exclusive. It depends on the relationship and how they define it. But non exclusive is usually something that you, millennials and Gen Z, would be known or know it as hooking up, maybe. And then there's long term, such as marriage. Although some people choose not to get married, but still stay in a committed, monogamous relationship for a long term. And of course, there's short terms. Maybe you guys call that friends with benefits or an FWB. And of course, there's different names as we go along, but that one's a typical one. Take, for example, this classroom. We all have a very specific relationship as well. So me as your instructor to you guys as my students and the other way around from your perspective, but also you with each other as well. You guys are classmates. And so that's a different type of relationship where you guys might be taking the same classes together. So when you guys typically, if we were in a real classroom, you guys would probably connect with each other, ask each other questions, maybe talk to each other before class starts or afterwards, maybe even asking, each other to be together as a study group or something like that. Avoiding intimacy can deprive ourselves of getting to know someone, which is true. If you don't feel like you can get close to someone and talk to them about meaningful things, it's going to really prevent you from actually being intimate with other people, right? Developing a meaningful bond. Are you involved in the kinds of relationships that satisfy you? What are you willing to do to improve your relationships? So the questions that you're going to get in this chapter are questions that are really great for you to ponder and ask yourself, but also then use them also for your own clients later on. All the questions here are questions that will most likely be open-ended questions that will have your clients really talk and expand about those things, okay? Meaningful relationships, a personal view. Culture plays a significant role in your relationships, and that should make sense to you, right? Depending on how you were raised, the culture that raised you, you will form specific types of relationships with the people around you. Each person in the relationship has a separate identity, which means that you are allowed to have personal time on your own. You can be close, but there should be a space between you both that allows the wind to pass through. And that's something that the textbook talks about where, let's imagine if you put your hands together and clasp them together and intertwine your fingers. You guys are now connected, right? But there's really no way of you being by yourself. Try to move one arm. The other arm immediately goes over and follows too, right? So you don't actually have time for yourself or personal time. But now relax your arms or your hands so that the fingertips are just touching. So you're still connected to the other person, but now there's a little bit more wiggle room so that you can, if you want to be alone for a little bit, you can, and it's okay. Each is able to give and receive honest and respectful feedback, being able to ask for what you want and not expecting the other to intuitively know. Intuitively know basically means to just automatically know in your gut, right? So in relationships, sometimes there are problems, and then one partner will say, well, she was supposed to know, or didn't he understand, or didn't he know that about me? And that means that you're expecting someone to mind read. And that is just not something that most people can do. So for other people to understand how you're feeling at a moment, you need to then vocalize it and talk about it. And obviously in a way that is respectful to each other. Both people are able to have fun and to play together. They're enjoying doing things with each other. So sometimes we don't take enough time to enjoy those we profess we love. Sometimes we automatically think that other people know that we love them and that's it. so you don't spend a lot of time with them. Let's say a parent with a child, right? And the child goes, hey, can we play or can we hang out? And the parent goes, yeah, I'm really, really busy right now. I can't really do anything, but I love you, right? Or sometimes people don't even say it. And then they just justify it to other people going, yeah, of course that person knows that I love them and stuff like that. I put food on the table and, blah, blah, blah. And for some people, although you are giving them gifts and stuff like that, they actually want to spend time with you and not the things that you give them. So you need to talk and communicate to understand how love is being perceived by different people. Even if it's in your own family, people might perceive it in different ways. Some people like to cook for other people. Some people like to buy gifts. Some people like to touch. And then other people like to spend time. So you need to understand. And I challenge you to ask your partners or your friends, what is the best way for me to show that I appreciate you? Okay. And then hear what they say and then realize, oh, you know what? It wasn't what I expected, and still be able to honor that intimate relationship with each other. Each person assumes responsibility for their own level of happiness and refrains from blaming the others when they are unhappy. If each person solely relies on others for personal fulfillment and confirmation as a person, there will be problems. So what we're talking about this right here is you need to know who you are and knows what makes you happy or unhappy, okay? However, if everything is based on how others think of you, like, you don't think you're pretty until other people say that you're pretty, let's say, or you don't think that you're smart until other people say that. Well, if you don't have people around, you're not going to feel smart or pretty. And that's very sad, don't you think? So instead of having other people always validating, or having you need them to validate you, otherwise you're useless or whatever, you can see how that could be an unhealthy type of thinking in relationship, right? Both people are willing to work at keeping the relationship healthy. To keep a relationship healthy, people involved must reevaluate and revise our way of being with each other from time to time. So although you might love spending time with each other all the time, where you guys only hang out with each other and no one else, maybe after a while you're like, you know what? think I need to hang out with my friends as well. I still love you very, very much as a partner, but I also want to hang out with my friends and have coffee, or I want to go to the movies with my friends, whatever it is after this pandemic that you're going to do with your friends. If the relationship contains a sexual component, each person assumes responsibility for the enjoyment of the relationship. So each person will have a different degree of intensity and passion, but they are sensitive to the needs and desires of the other partner. So what that is saying is, let's say that if you do have sex and you enjoy it with that person, are you also sure that your partner is enjoying themselves as well? And if not, maybe you should talk to them about it and see how they could also enjoy it as much as you are enjoying having sex with them. Two people are equal in the relationship. One person may be the giver, so there is an imbalance. Both parties need to be willing to look at aspects of inequality and demonstrate willingness to negotiate change. So what that is talking about is, that you do respect each other and understand how the other person operates, okay? And you'll notice this in some relationships where one person is the giver and the other person is the receiver, right? And I want you to now start to think about how that might be an imbalance because one person's not getting something and then the other person's learning never to learn how to give, only to take. And that might not necessarily be the most healthy relationship either. However, there are some relationships that are just like that as well. But I want you to understand that the purpose of this statement here is that you are seeing each other as equals, even though you have different responsibilities. Each person finds meaning outside of the relationship. Avoid ownership of friends. Sometimes you'll see this in relationships as well, is like they're not allowed to have a friend or friends outside the relationship because why would you need anyone else besides me in the relationship or in your life, right? But to learn how to open up so that your partner can have friends and can expand their lives will also make your life enriching as well. You might not see it in the short run, but in the bigger picture, when both partners are happy and can de-stress, because sometimes partners will make each other stress out or have a fight for them to be able to kind of like release some of that stress with their friends and stuff like that. Okay, each person is moving in a direction in life that is personally meaningful. Both are excited about the quality of their lives and their projects. Are their needs of both being met? So that's also really important is you want to grow with someone as a partner who is also going in the same direction that you are. That doesn't mean the same, field or profession, but just that you both want to go towards a specific goal and you're both working on it together or separately or both to get to that place. Okay. Sometimes it's very frustrating when one partner doesn't want to do anything while the other partner, wants to do things, right? And so there might be an imbalance there. And so maybe the other person feels like the other person's being too pushy or something like that. And it becomes unhealthy that way, potentially. They are able to deal with conflicts in their relationships. Conflicts cannot go away. How do you deal with one when it arises? Okay, so now we're talking about how do you deal with when there is a problem? Do you pretend like it doesn't exist? Or do you talk it out? Or do you do something else? If they are in a committed relationship, they maintain their relationship by choice, not out of duty or because of convenience. What to look at is what is lacking in the relationship and to work on changing. So in this situation, what we're talking about is you're not staying in there because you're getting something out of it like money or perks of some sort, that you are actually involved with each other because you guys want to. Obviously, there are certain relationships where one person's giving and the other person is just taking, and that's great for both of them. And if that is, and they say so, then you leave it alone. But in general, a lot of meaningful relationships mean that you're not there because you feel sad for a person or feel bad for them or feel guilty or something like that. Because that doesn't really signify love or intimacy. That's more about, duty, right? Like responsibility. And we want you to understand the difference between those two things. Do not expect the other to do for them what they are capable of doing for themselves. Neither person will depend on the other for confirmation of personal worth. By making yourself worthy, you contribute to the relationship. So what that is really talking about is, do you value yourself? Do you love yourself? Because once you're able to do that, then you can love others much more meaningfully. Okay? But if you don't love yourself, but you're looking for other people to love you, and that's how you feel love, then that might be something that you might want to work on your own about yourself first. Because you're actually not helping the other person because you're not growing together. You are just there because that person's giving you what you need. Encourage each other to become all that they're capable of becoming. Out of fear, a partner may try to control their partner and thus make it difficult for their partner to be their authentic self. So again, when you don't know your own value, it can be very problematic within a relationship with other people. And that doesn't have to be an intimate relationship. It could even be a counseling relationship, right? Imagine if you are a client and you're looking for a counselor. Do you want someone who is low in self-confidence or very unsure of themselves? Or do you want someone who feels like they know who they are, they're comfortable with who they are, they know that they're not perfect, and it's okay, right? Because we're humans and we will make mistakes. Here is the 7 principles for making a marriage work. And I've hyperlinked it there. The title is hyperlinked, so you can go and read a little bit more about it. But these are some of the overall themes that show up in this book. Intimate familiarity, which means couples know each other's goals, concerns, and hopes. Do you know your partner's goals, concerns, and hopes? Do you know your best friend's goals, concerns, and hopes? Do you know your parents' goals, concerns, and hopes? And respect what they're thinking about. You can disagree, obviously, right? But are you aware of what they have in their heads when they are asked these questions? Fondness and admiration is couples who feel honor and respect for one another can more easily revitalize the relationship. So if you value each other, that is a really great way to have a good bond, right? If you understand who they are as a person and respect that, then the relationship is probably going to grow from there. Connectedness. When individuals honor each other, they are generally able to appreciate each other's perspective, right? If everyone was just like you, then there's really no point in even talking, right? Because we know exactly who the person is. But the one really interesting thing is that everyone has their own opinions and value systems. And it's really great to get to know them and understand what those things are and why those people value those things. Share a sense of power. When couples disagree, they look for common ground rather than insisting that their way has to be supreme. So you might have an argument and you can say to the other person, I understand where you're coming from, but I'm still going to disagree with what you're saying, right? That allows the other person to be who they are and not feel attacked. In the same way to you, right? It's okay to disagree on something, okay? But you need to still value them and not judge them on just that one specific thing. But just say, you know what, although we don't like the same things in this aspect, we still really enjoy each other in other areas as well. Okay. Shared goals. Partners incorporate each other's goals into their concept of what the intimate relationship is all about. Um, so when you guys know your own desires and dreams, is to share it to each other and let you guys know that some of them might be the same, and then you can try to do it together as well. Maybe own a home, or buy a car, or have children, or something like that. Open communication. Each person in the relationship can talk fully and honestly about their convictions and core beliefs. So that's really great as well in the sense of being able to say about the things that you are that are on your mind, right? And the other person is okay with it, okay? Because if you are not feeling like you can be open and honest and blunt about what you're thinking, what are you hiding? And why is that going to be a healthy thing for that relationship? Now let's talk about anger and conflicts in relationships. Expressing anger constructively. Do you just yell or do you actually express and say what's going on your mind in a respectful way to your partner? How is anger expressed in your own home? Just take a moment to think about how your parents dealt with anger, how your siblings, and how you dealt with anger. Who got angry and what typically occurred? Did you guys end up fighting or slamming the door or just not talking to other people? What happened in your life and how do you deal with it? Did dealing with conflict and anger bring people closer together or move them further apart? Is what you learn as a child about expressing anger and dealing with conflicting conflict helping or hindering you at this time in your life? So the way that you used to deal with it as a kid, do you still do it like that as well as an adult? And if so, is that actually good for you or bad for you, do you think? There has to be safety felt within the relationship, being able to express feelings that the other might not want to hear, right? So it's just like a counseling relationship. You want to feel safe when you're talking about these things because you don't want something, outside of our conversation to get out of control. Um, the violence of silence, also known as stonewalling, is when you pretend to not acknowledge the person at all, right? And the other person feels ignored and not seen, and they're not going to feel great about it. You're holding in your own, self instead of actually opening up and talking about it and trying to resolve it. Some people cannot handle confrontation, and that can be considered a very abusive relationship right there. Now let's examine some anger statements. What you say and what you feel are not congruent. So maybe someone says, honey, you look like you're upset. Are you okay? Then you respond back with, I'm fine, I'm not angry, but you really are, right? So this is an anger statement. Or you overreact to what is said to you when it is difficult to hear. You typically walk away from conflict situations instead of actually dealing with it. You respond without thinking and often have regrets later about what you said. You often have physical symptoms such as headaches and stomach aches. You know you hurt the other person, yet you're unwilling to acknowledge that. You rarely resolve a conflict, assuming that time will take care of everything. Because sometimes people think that when you ignore it long enough, it just goes away, but it really doesn't, does it? You focus on the other person's flaws and rarely on your own shortcomings. During altercations, that basically means kind of like a fight or disagreement, you bring up a litany of old grievances. So then you bring up stuff that happens in the past. You hold grudges and are unwilling to forgive. And you'll probably recognize some of these behaviors with your family members, your loved ones, and stuff like that, right? And I certainly do see this in like my mom in certain ways. As a person who is raised Asian and she is a female, she was always told to be quiet, she's less than, that she's not worthy. And then as a mother to me, she's older, so I always have to listen to her, that I cannot disagree with her or prove her wrong because it would be considered disrespectful. Then we would get into a fight or something like that. So I definitely know, some people hold grudges and they'll bring it up, in the middle of a fight. And then you're like, what does that have to do with anything? But for them, they feel like they're justified in yelling at another person because of it. Let's talk a little bit about intimate partner violence and abuse. Sometimes the person being abused is not aware of the extent of the abuse. Okay, sometimes people who are abused don't even know that they're being abused. They have rationalized that their relationship is not so bad and that one day it'll get better. Sometimes they think it's their fault, not the abuser's fault, that they're being abused. Not all abusive relationships involve physical violence because there's also sexual violence, emotional violence, psychological violence, and financial violence. And sometimes emotional abuse is very subtle, which basically means that sometimes you don't even know that the other person's manipulating you through your emotions, okay? Sometimes the person being abused thinks that they can change the other person. Have you ever heard of that? Where you're like, oh yeah, I can change that person. They just need some help, right? But let's be honest, most of the time, a person who is not aware that they need to change will not change. No matter what you do, they will not change. They will only change when they want to change, right? And that is very tough for some of us to realize. Here are some verbal put downs that may happen. Withholding love and affection. So you don't deserve my love until you do these things, A, B, and C. Okay. Or striking, hitting, pushing, or shoving. Using physical or psychological threats. Making promises yet never keeping them. Unpredictable behavior. Extreme jealousy and possessiveness. Chronic hostility and sarcasm. So it means like always keep on happening all the time. That's what chronic means. And then controlling resources such as finances and transportation. Sometimes a partner will not let the other partner go to work or go to school. So they're going to be uneducated and they're not going to be skilled, right? So that partner will never leave them, because who's going to want to date someone or be with someone, let's say, who doesn't know anything, right? That's what they are trying to do, that abuser is trying to do for the victim. Let's talk about addressing conflict and confrontation in an effective way. Recognize that conflict can be a healthy sign of individual differences, so we agree to disagree. And that's great, right? Like, I hope that, and this is something that happens quite a bit, or you'll hear about it right now, which is that Democrats can't be friends with Republicans, Republicans can't be friends with Democrats. I'm hoping that you guys can be friends with everyone and still disagree on certain things. Right? Maybe there's certain things that you're like, absolutely not, I cannot be friends with this person. That's fine. But I don't want you to generalize it to all of one person, if that makes sense. See confrontation as a caring act, not as an attack, right? So when people offer you criticism, you're going to say, well, that person is telling me that because they want me to be a better person, right? Or improve the way that I'm doing something. And that's great. I appreciate that person. But you also need to let yourself, and if I disagree with it, I don't have to follow it, right? But to know that when the person is offering you that suggestion, that they're coming from a place of kindness and they want you to grow, okay? So say it in the way that you would want to be told, okay? So let's say that if a person responded to a question in a way that you think is not necessarily so great, you would want to think about how you would say it and then share it with them, okay? Or if you were in that person's shoes, how would you want people to tell you that you're doing something wrong, okay? Resist the temptation to plan your next response while the other person is speaking. This is not about winning. And this is actually a communication skill, which is active listening. Sometimes when we're having a conversation with a friend or another person, we're already trying to think about how we're going to respond and not really listen to them. Instead, this is a thing that you need to train yourself and teach yourself, is when another person is talking, is to put everything in your head away and just really listen to that person as they're talking at that moment. If you do confront a person, identify your motivation. Are you doing this because you are concerned? So you might say something like, you know what? I saw that you were struggling with this, and I just wanted to let you know that, this is something that I thought about. Do you want to hear my idea? Right? And then you're inviting that person to come into this conversation, which is wonderful because they can feel like, yeah, I can. Or you have to also realize this is that they can say, nope, I don't. And they're going to go, oh, okay, and then move along. Okay? Not everyone wants to hear what you have to say, and that's totally fine. Are you okay with that? If someone doesn't want to hear your opinion, accept responsibility for your own feelings. Do not blame others on how you feel. So that basically means is, when you're angry from having a conversation with someone, don't blame it on that person. You need to think about why that statement made you angry. Are you feeling a little insecure or self-conscious about something? Is that why it made you angry? Or embarrassed or whatever it is, and maybe you don't like the feeling of being embarrassed, that's why you're upset, and then you blame the other person for making you feel embarrassed. But why are you embarrassed? You need to really analyze your own self first, right, to understand where they're coming from. In confronting another, try not to make dogmatic statements about another person. So remember, the word dogmatic basically means statements that cannot be questioned. Okay, it's just, this is a set of rules and we accept it because we believe in it, and that's it. Instead of telling others how they are, say how their behavior affects you. So instead of saying, you're being really mean, you should say something like, hey, what you're saying feels like an attack on me and I don't understand why. Can you please explain further? Because I feel like there's some reason why there's some hostility between us and I don't understand, right? So that way you are still expressing it from your own perspective, okay? And it doesn't seem to be something that they cannot defend themselves or talk to you about. Tell others how you are struggling with them. Here's an example is, you are insensitive and uncaring. Instead, explain why you think this is. Do not just make declarative statements without being informative. Okay, so again, you should say something where, instead of saying you are insensitive and uncaring, you can say, the statement that you said made me feel like, I'm not blah, 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 or whatever, and let them know that this is how what they're doing to you makes you feel. Okay, and then you can have a conversation. Don't walk away from conflict. Timeout is okay, but not avoiding. So you might not be able to deal with a situation right at that moment. So you want to take some time to reflect or think about it before you come back, right? But don't just pretend like it doesn't exist for the rest of your life. Instead, come back when you're ready to have this conversation. But don't ignore it, because that will be more of a defense mechanism. And if you keep on doing it, it's just not going to be very helpful for you in the long run with relationships with other people. Recognize the importance of forgiving those who have hurt you. Holding grudges will inhibit intimacy. Forgiveness does not mean forgetting. So when someone has done something wrong to you and you value them as a person, as a friend, as a partner, and you understand that everyone can err, right? Can make mistakes, and that it's a learning curve, basically. So if you do honestly believe those things, then you can forgive someone, right? You don't have to forget what they did, but you can forgive them for what they did, because again, humans are people who make mistakes. No one is perfect in that way. Um, but what you don't want to do is always bring that up every time you had a fight, right? Because then that means that you're holding a grudge. That means that you actually haven't dealt with what has happened earlier between you two. And now you're just bringing it up again, even though you both agreed, or you thought you both agreed, that this is now past us. Recognize that it is essential to forgive yourself. And that is very true. I have done things when I was younger, when I was not very smart. I did a bunch of things that I'm very embarrassed about. And it's okay, right? Because I've learned from them. I think about it and I go, oh, that was not a good thing. But from now on, this is how I operate. And it means it's a good thing. So what I did as a kid that was awful, it has been a learning lesson for me, right? And I hope that you also see it like that as well. When you forgive, you are not doing it for someone else, you're doing it for yourself. When you forgive someone, that means you're letting that thing go, because you don't want that to live inside your brain forever, right? Rent free, especially. You want to have good things live in your life, not bad stuff. So you're going to let those things go. And that's what forgiving is to do. And again, remember, when you ask for forgiveness from other people, they have the choice of either forgiving you or not forgiving you, right? And then from there, you can then operate. But you know at least that you've asked for forgiveness and you did the best that you could, you know? And for sometimes what you did might have been so intense and so awful to them that they're not willing to ever forgive you. And that's okay. You have to just move on. Because if you just live there, you're not going to progress or go forward. And then the art of dying, which is basically when people start to die, people forgive at the end of the life because it is their last chance to do so. Sometimes, you know, we'll have these conversations that are kind of deep and scary and personal at the end because that person wants to let go of all those things before they pass away. Forgiveness can lead to a resurrection of love, right? And, you know, sometimes maybe that person who's dying did the wrong. And so they ask people for forgiveness. And it's up to you to decide whether or not you can, right? Is it such a big issue that when a person is about to die and they're acknowledging that maybe they did something wrong, are you willing to accept it and move on, right? Or do you hold on to it? Some of us do, some of us don't. I hope that you learn how to forgive and to ask for forgiveness as well when that situation requires it. Forgiveness is like a spiritual pruning of the soul. It cuts away the rotten parts so that there is room for healthy to grow. And that's really a wonderful visual, right? Basically, you're cutting the branches that stick out so that you have this beautiful plant that is growing in the way that you want it to grow. Let's talk more about effective personal communication. One is listening while the other speaks. One is listening in order to understand, right? You are not listening just to respond. You're listening to understand that person. Do not rehearse your responses while others are speaking. Be able to summarize what your partner just said. So you might be able to, again, paraphrase, right? That's a key word we learned in your counseling classes. So here's an example. So you're hurt when I don't call to tell you that I'll be late. So you recognize an emotion right there, and then the behavior that you did, right? So it's really great way, this formula of saying the emotion and then the activity that are related to each other. The language is specific. So let's talk about a vague statement or an unclear or kind of like a weird statement, which is, I feel manipulated. Well, we don't really know how you feel manipulated, right? Or why you feel manipulated. So a better way to state it, and again, words are really powerful and strong, is I don't like it when you bring me flowers and then expect me to do something for you that I already told you I didn't want to do, right? So that really does explain what that manipulation that you were talking about earlier, but really clearly so the other person knows exactly what you're saying. Okay, and it's really hard for us sometimes to make these evidence-based statements. And I want you to start practicing these things because you're going to need to know how to do it, and then you're going to need to be able to teach your clients how to do it as well. The speaker makes personal statements instead of bombarding the other with questions. So here is a questioning phrase, which is, where were you last night, and why did you come home so late? Okay, so that's already very intense and very direct and confrontational, right? Let's talk about a more personal way of saying it that has the same meaning, but in a respectful way, which is, I was worried and scared because I didn't know where you were last night. See, isn't the same thing, but doesn't sound like an attack on another person, and then that person will be able to kind of explain what's going on, right? Because before, when you are attacking them, they're going to go, oh my goodness, just relax or whatever, right? But this way you're like, oh, I disrespected you. Now I feel like I need to now explain myself as well. Let's have this conversation. The listener takes a moment to respond, to reflect on what has just been said and its effect it had on them. So you might say something like, I'm sorry, it didn't even cross my mind to call you. I will be more sensitive the next time. You see how that is better than just saying like, okay, right? Because all that stuff doesn't really facilitate communication. You guys are communicating, but it's in a very short way and not a very healthy and a way to grow with another person. There's an absence of critical judgment. So here's a judgmental one is, you never think about anyone but yourself and you're totally irresponsible. So that sounds judgmental, right? Like you're judging them and thinking this is how they are. Instead, I would encourage you guys to say it in a more neutral way, not so judgmental, such as, I appreciate it when you think to call me, knowing that I might be worried, right? Same thing again, except for it doesn't sound so angry like before. Also use some I statements. Sometimes I worry that you don't care about me and I want you to know that rather than assuming that it's true. Okay, so again, you are using your own statements, your own I statements to let them know this is really about me, right? And this is the conversation we're having is how I'm feeling at the moment because of what's going on. Respect for each other's differences and avoidance of pressuring each other to accept a point of view. So here's the responses. I look at this matter very differently than you do, but I understand that you have your own thoughts on it, right? So again, it's kind of like a we agree to disagree, and this is how I'm going to say it so that it shows that I still respect you even though we disagree on this thing. Congruence, like we said before, is when you say that you're angry, you should not be smiling when that happens, right? Because then it's not congruent to what your statement is. Okay. Each person is open about how he or she is affected by the other. So here's an ineffective way of saying that. You have no right to criticize me. Instead, here's an effective way, which is, I'm disappointed that you didn't like the work that I've done. Okay. Again, they're very similar still, but in one way, you're expressing your feelings and your thoughts in a way that explains why you're feeling those things. Let's talk about relationships in the changing world. You millennials and you Gen Zers, and whatever it is in the future, you guys do operate in a different way because of technology. Technology is shaping the way people meet, develop relationships, and communicate with one another. Just think about our class right now. Instead of being in face-to-face because of this pandemic, we're actually learning through the computer. And we're not even learning at the same time on the computer. You know, some of you guys might access these materials on Tuesday, some of you guys might access this stuff on a Thursday. Never know. Don't know, right? So relationships and social networking is a major issue that we do need to talk about. It's not uncommon to have friends all over the world now because of technology. Connect with people that you know or rekindle relationships from your past. You might communicate with others who share your interests, or you might even break up with people over the computer or over social media. You know, the term unfollow is now a word now because it's all about following and unfollowing a person on social media. Some have a reliance on social media and quantify their interpersonal interactions. So what that is talking about is sometimes people don't feel like they're worth anything until other people, and a lot of people, say that they are by doing the like button or something like that, right? And that's something that can be very problematic, is that if you think that you are only valuable because of how many people like your statement, that can be very problematic about your self-confidence and how you perceive yourself. And remember, whatever you say online can easily be misunderstood online as well because you don't hear the tone. Sometimes you can use an emoji to help you, but still, have you ever written something online and then people misunderstood what you wrote? There's also a disconnection instead of a connection sometimes for some people. Some go to social media to avoid face-to-face interactions, and that's not necessarily so great as well, right? If you do not want to talk to other people because you're afraid, and so you only do it online, it can be problematic about what is going on with yourself. Some will say things online that they would never say in real life because they feel anonymous and distant, right? And we've heard of the term trolling, right? That's what it is. It's inappropriate self-disclosure, making rude comments, or showing or stating extreme opinions. And we hear about, people attacking the left wing or attacking the right wing, because they're being extremists and stuff like that. And part of that is because people online can kind of just delete their account and no one will know. And so they feel like they can do it because of that. So it shows that people are not necessarily understanding how other people are, and they don't understand themselves either. They're doing things that are destructive and unhealthy for fun or for validation, because when you say something crazy, people are going to go, whoa, and that attention for them is good. But remember, some attention is not that great, right? Or not helpful for you because you're going to crave it all the time. You'll hear about this with influencers, right? They're like, oh my gosh, I'm so exhausted because I've been doing all of the things so that I can get, 1 million followers and stuff like that. And they realize, what is it all worth, because I don't even know these people. Are they fake? Are they real? I don't even know. So what is the point of me existing? Right? And sometimes influencers and social media people like TikTokers or whatever are going to eventually come to that realization. Online dating has a potential advantage of matching for compatibility because let's say that you go onto something like Christian Mingle. That means that you have Christian values, right? Or there was one called Black Planet for a while. I don't know if it still exists. That is all about African American connections, right? So online dating could be wonderful if it's something like that. Because it also makes getting to know each other less awkward because you already know that you share some things in common with other people that you value. Some relationships develop more rapidly, and those are known as hyper-personal relationships. Have you ever talked to someone on like Tinder or whatever, and suddenly the conversation got really close really fast? And that's not something necessarily can happen in real life, right? It could not, I don't know, it depends. But online, sometimes you feel a little bit more braver and saying things that you might not say in real life. Because you can edit and take more time to respond, they may seem more likable than they are in person, which is very true. When you're having a conversation in person, you might make mistakes or you might say things that are not necessarily perfect, right? But online, you can wait a couple minutes or wait a couple seconds before you respond. You can edit your statement and stuff like that. Maybe you type out your sentence and you're like, oh, wait a minute, let me change this. And then suddenly you sound really perfect, right? And that might not really be that person then, right? People idealize a person before meeting each other. Is this who they really are? And sometimes, like, we all take pictures that we think are going to be nice looking of us, right? Where we don't have, like, the four chins or whatever it is that we have. We twist our hips a little bit so we look a little bit thinner, maybe, or something like that. And then, is that really you? It is you, but is it really you? Maybe some of us Photoshop our skin to make it smoother, make us thinner, make us look like we have a tan, or whatever. And that's something then that can be problematic because then when you meet that person in real life, you're like, oh, I thought you were this person, but you really aren't, right? So that could also be a con when it comes to online dating. Let's talk about internet infidelity. So some people develop affairs in cyberspace that they keep secretly. So even though you might be in a relationship with someone, you might be chatting with other people on the DMs, right? Which is direct message. We hear about this with celebrities, I'll give you an example at this moment would be Cardi B and her husband. They're breaking up now because supposedly he has been hooking up with other people through social media or meeting them and talking to them in social media and then actually hooking up with them in real life. So then that becomes another issue as well because you're pretending to be one person in real life with your partner, but then you're living another life with your side piece online, right? And again, that becomes a thing called splitting, which is a defense mechanism. You're living two different lives because you're not getting something that you want from one, so you go and live a different one completely, right? So they might be considered a cheater, or they may have relationship problems in real life, and that's the reason why they're seeking out satisfactions from somewhere else. So it's something that you want to have an open conversation about before, let's say, you take the next step. Some websites even promote having an affair. There was a one that was called ashleymadison.com that was really big, and then a bunch of hackers came in and actually said shut down because we're gonna basically share all this information if you don't, right? Because it was about promoting having affairs, breaking up relationships, or whatever. And their theme was life is short. have an affair. So the online people are encouraging you to do these things, to misbehave, to cheat on your partners and stuff like that. And hopefully, if you have a good relationship with your partner, you might really don't need to do that. If you guys want to have an open relationship, maybe that's something you should talk about. Don't just do it without your partner knowing, because that's not really having an open relationship, is it? That means that you're disrespecting the relationship. Okay, let's talk a little bit about gay and lesbian relationships as well. Marriage equality is now in all states, so you can get married in all states. Although marriage equality is nationwide, think of opponents. So sometimes, though, just because legally you can get married if you're LGBT, doesn't mean that people are going to always help you. There was a woman, and I believe in Tennessee, who said that she would not sign any marriage certificates for LGBT couples. Okay, and think about that. A person who works for the government who's saying, nope, my religion says you cannot get married, so I'm not going to sign it for you, right? So again, there are going to be people who are going to fight you and disagree with you, even though it might be the law. There's a documentary with Stephen Fry, who is a British guy. He's really well known in England, about being LGBT in the world today. So I've hyperlinked it. It's called Out There. This is episode 1. There's a bunch of episodes, so I encourage you guys to take some time if you want to see. He basically interviews people who are LGBTQIA all over the world and how their country or their community sees them. Do they want to kill them, or do they welcome them? Do they accept them? Or is it kind of like, indifferent? Depending on the country and their value system, you're going to see that it's perceived differently. Okay, let's now define some words that happen in the LGBTQIA population. Sexual orientation. It refers to the gender or genders that person is attracted to physically, emotionally, sexually, and romantically. Okay, so sexual orientation means who do you find attractive based on who you are and then who they are. Heterosexism is a bias against gay males, lesbians, and bisexuals. It is a belief system that values heterosexuality as superior to homosexuality. So heterosexism or heterosexist is basically saying that people who are straight are better than people who are LGBTQIA, which shows you right there's a bias, and that's unfair. Think about you having a client who is LGBTQIA, and then you just automatically assume that they are straight, and then they're going, wow, this person isn't even going to consider the fact that I actually might be something else, right? That my sexual orientation might be different. And if they think that, if they assume that already, what else are they going to assume about me as well? Okay, let's define some really easy words, although some of you guys might not know. So we're going to just do it really quickly. Lesbian. A woman who is psychologically, emotionally, and sexually attracted to other women. Gay men is males who are psychologically, emotionally, or sexually attracted to other men. Bisexual is individuals who are psychologically, emotionally, and sexually attracted to both men and women. And then there's transgender, which is not a sexual orientation, that's a gender identity. But the reason why it's part of the LGBTQIA abbreviation is because people are very confused about what it is to be trans. And so all these fringe sexualities and stuff like that and identities are confusing for a lot of people, but we all band together so that we can, help each other out in that sense, okay? So for transgender, umbrella term for persons whose gender identity, gender expression, or behavior does not conform to that typical associated with the sex to which they were assigned at birth. Okay, so let's say that there is a person who was born a male, right? But don't identify with being a male, but identify with being a female. So then that person might consider themselves transgender if they label themselves that way. Or the other way around, which is that someone who is born a female who now identifies as male, they could be part of this umbrella term of transgender. There's actually even more when it comes to non-binary gender identity as well. And I have hyperlinked 2 things because this area is actually a little bit more complicated than we're just discussing on this slide. So if you want to know more information, please feel free to click on these 2 hyperlinks. One is to GLAAD and one is to the APA to understand how gender and sexual identity and stuff like that is being seen today. Psychological views of homosexuality. How sexual orientation is established is still not understood. So we don't really know if it's genetic, if there's any physiological factors, doesn't mean like, actual body parts or whatever that's causing us to do this, or learn, as in like, do you see other people do it, therefore you do it. We really don't know the answer to this just yet, right? Because science is not that complex in the sense of being able to see this. But a lot of people do now believe that it is genetic, that's in your cells, that determines if you're going to be, let's say, gay or lesbian or bisexual. But is that all for everyone? Not necessarily. We are a very complicated and intelligent animal as humans, right? So there might be actually multiple reasons, not just one reason why. Many LGBT report that they did not actively choose their sexual orientation any more than they did their gender. So a lot of people say, you know what, it just, that's who I am. They didn't purposely choose to be this way, right? And you'll hear this when it comes to people who say, why would I choose to be like this if I know that so many people hate gays or lesbians or bisexuals, right? So why would someone choose purposely to endure these pains and these struggles? And that kind of makes sense if you think about it, right? In 1975, American Psychological Association, or the APA, stopped calling homosexuality a mental disorder. So only 45 years ago, if we're talking about being in 2020, it was considered a mental illness to be gay, right? I know for you millennials and you Gen Z, you're like, what? That is so crazy. But that is very true. So when you meet other people who are older, they might still be influenced by the fact that they thought that being gay or lesbian or bisexual or trans or whatever actually was a mental illness that they needed to fix, right? But now, in modern times, we know that people are this way and we accept them and respect them for who they are. This required people to change their perceptions on LGBT and see it as acceptable, but it is still very slow, apparent by social prejudices, stigmatizations, and discrimination, and that's very true. Until very, very recently, you could be fired from your job for being gay, or if your boss thought you were gay, okay, you were able to be fired in some states. In California, we're fortunate enough to have really good progressive laws that are in force, so you cannot be fired for that because that would be considered discrimination. But for other states, for a long time, until very recently, as in like 2020, you could be fired for being who you are. Or if your boss just thinks that you might be even gay, they could fire you. LGBT goes to counseling for similar reasons, such as relationship problems, coping with crisis situations, dealing with oppression, prejudice, and discrimination. And I encourage you guys, if you don't know a lot about the LGBTQIA population, is to understand why they might have these relationships, what kind that's unique to this population, or, when they talk about being oppressed, what does that mean to them specifically? Can you tell me 5 different reasons why an LGBT person might say that they are discriminated, right? Can you? If not, I encourage you guys to start learning about how to understand and learn from that population. Here's some other words I wanted to find. Prejudice, preconceived opinion that is not based on reason or actual experience. So prejudice might be something that you were told when you were younger and you believe it. So now you're judging a whole group of people from something that someone told you, maybe your family members, right? And this happens a lot when it comes to LGBTQIA people. If you're religious, for some religions, they say, being gay is evil, it's a sin, it's terrible, you're going to go to hell, right? So you're like, okay, well, all gay people are bad. And that is considered a prejudice. Discrimination is the treatment in favor or against a person based on the group, class, category the person belongs to, as opposed to the individual person's merits. So you might know someone who is, let's say, African American, but you don't like the group of people, so you're going to go, nope, I'm not going to hire any African Americans. That would be considered discrimination. Or Asians, or Latinx, whatever it is. Attitudes come partly from religious traditions, like we just said before. There's also hate crimes. That's assault or murder are directed against a victim based on a category, like they're gay, lesbian, bi, trans, QIA as well. Homophobia is the irrational fear of LGBT and negative attitudes towards homosexuality. Okay, is to be scared of that group, but also hate them, not like them, don't tolerate them, and stuff like that would be considered homophobia. As more people starting to be open about LGBTQIA stuff, the AIDS crisis started to happen. So that did not help, right? Because they're like trying to learn that this is not a bad thing, but then there's this disease that was killing a lot of people back in the 70s and 80s and 90s, right? Now it's no longer because we have a really great amount of drugs that actually helps a person live in a very healthy way and actually a long way. So now having AIDS or having HIV is no longer considered a death sentence. Okay, it used to be considered a felony if you gave someone else HIV. Now it's a misdemeanor. Okay, because people actually can still live a successful and happy life living with it, whereas before, without the drugs, people were dying. Okay, and of course, this created more fear and animosity towards the LGBT population, is because they were really saying that gays were doing this and causing this disease to kill other people. Now let's talk a little bit about separation and divorce. So the first thing I have here is Shania Twain divorce interview on Oprah. I hyperlinked it. It's a really great interview to hear where this woman, Shania Twain, who is a major singer, talk about her marriage and how it fell apart and how she felt as the marriage was falling apart and how she was dealing with divorce and her feelings about the divorce. It's a really powerful 30-minute video. I encourage you guys to watch it because think about her as a client. If she was telling you all of this, how would you respond to all this stuff? Fear of being alone often keeps people from ending a relationship, right? So you don't leave the relationship or you don't break up, you don't get a divorce because you're afraid of being on your own. Maybe because you've never been on your own before. But is that a good reason why you should stay in a relationship that doesn't make either one of you happy or you happy? Finding new relationships or finding new ways of being in relationships is something that is going to be challenging, right? When communication breaks down, people tend to have the same arguments over and over again. So because you guys are not really talking about the things that you really need to talk about, you pick fights on all these little minor things, but really you are just avoiding the big confrontation or the big conflict. Do you divorce or challenge yourself to see things differently so you can relate to each other again? So that means, do you guys go to therapy and talk things out and recalibrate so that you guys are matching up again and you guys are now falling in love with each other like you did when you first met? So let's talk now about when to separate or terminate a significant relationship. Think about these questions. Has each of you sought personal therapy or counseling? Have you considered seeking relationship counseling? Are you both interested in maintaining your relationship? So do you both still want to be in this marriage, right? Have you each taken the time to be alone, to focus, and to decide what kind of life you want for yourself and with others? What do you expect each from the dissolution of their relationship? Let me read that again, sorry. What do you each expect from the dissolution of the relationship? So once you guys are broken up and divorced, what do you expect of each other when it comes to relationship? Will you never see each other again? Or will you remain friends? Will you remain talking to each other? Maybe because you share children, right? What is going to happen at the end? Have you thought about that? When you feel like you cannot leave, here are some things that people say. I have too many years invested in this relationship, so I don't want to leave. Or I'm afraid to break off the relationship because I might be even more lonely than I am now. I am concerned that I have not given us a fair enough chance to make a go of it. Or you might say, I would lose my immigration status. Or I'm dependent financially and I'm concerned that I won't be able to support myself. I fear the judgment of my family and friends. My religion does not condone divorce. My culture prohibits me from divorcing. Or I can't leave because of the children. If there are children involved, make a commitment to the well-being of your children, right? So these are just some of the things that people might say to stay in a relationship that's not very healthy, right? Can you identify with some of these? Maybe? How would you react if your client said something like this, right? So again, you have to let them decide, right? But talking about it can be very uncomfortable. So I want you to start being able to be open enough to start talking about it and not be uncomfortable because you do not need to be uncomfortable. The client is already uncomfortable enough. Coping with an ending of a long-term relationship, allow yourself to grieve. So this is a hyperlink to one of my favorite articles ever. It is about a woman in China who was dumped, and she went to KFC, which is Kentucky Fried Chicken in China, and she spent a week there because it's open 24 hours. And it is such an interesting um, story. Like, she spent a whole week inside a fast food restaurant thinking about what she should do now that her boyfriend dumped her. And I think I give her so much respect because she's evaluating, she's thinking about all those things, right? Which is wonderful. It's better than ignoring it, right? And then pretending like, nothing really happened. She's thinking, did I do something wrong? Or is it they who did something wrong? Or what, right? And I hope that you also start to evaluate your relationship that way as well. And give yourself some time, right? She gave herself a week just to think. That's amazing. Allow yourself to express the anger if you're angry. Depersonalize your partner's actions. Maybe it was your partner and not you, right? Sometimes your partner is just a jerk and you need to leave because they're a jerk, right? If there's nothing else about it, they were just a jerk. And that's not your problem. Take responsibility of your own part in the relationship. So you don't blame but get insight from it, right? It's maybe you were part of the reason why too. Find a support network. So talk to your friends or families or other loved ones about what's going on, or even like a therapist as well. Take care of other aspects of your life. Write in your own journal. Make amends, which means basically if there were some wrongs, fix it. You know, get closure, and then love, and then learn, and then move forward.